The cold was the kind that didn't ask permission it took. Breath warmth, time memory. It scraped the bones like sandpaper and didn't care who you were. And for Raymond Callahan, father of one currently homeless unemployed and a hair's breadth from complete collapse, it was just Tuesday. He stood in a half-lit alley behind Silver Hollow's abandoned grain co-op, cradling his shivering daughter against his chest, beneath two threadbare coats. Ellie was asleep or trying to be her cheek pressed against his collarbone, her breath shallow, fogging the air in soft bursts. She hadn't cried in days. That scared him more than the cold. At his feet, Milo, a grizzled old Labrador with one white eye and paws like loaded springs, lay like a fallen sentinel, ears twitching, body tense. He was the only thing left in Ray's life that hadn't failed him. And he'd almost sold him twice. The wind howled through the alley, carving around the bricks, rattling the sheet metal stacked behind the dumpsters. Ray shifted, teeth clenched, eyes narrowed toward the glow of the diner window across the street. Warmth. Light. People who belonged somewhere. A sudden bang, sharp and too close, sent Milo snapping upright. "Easy boy," Ray whispered, bracing his hand on the dog's neck. The dog didn't bark. He didn't need to. He just stared rigid toward the dark mouth of the alley. Footsteps. Ray's body went cold in a new way. A figure emerged, no coat, no hat, cheeks already red from the cold. A woman, middle-aged, small but purposeful, moving like she wasn't used to fear, but had learned how to carry it anyway. She saw them and paused. "Raymond Callahan," she asked. The last time someone said his full name like that, it ended with a court summons and a foreclosure. He didn't answer. "I work with the county registrar's office," she said, holding up a sealed envelope as if it might explode. "I've been trying to find you." "Well, congratulations," Ray muttered. "You found me. Welcome to paradise." She didn't smile, just took a slow step forward and held out the envelope like it weighed more than it should. "This is regarding Eleanor Monroe," she said. "Your grandmother." Ray flinched visibly. The name was a sharp stone thrown into still water. The memory of pine needles, smoke-stained quilts, and a voice that hummed even when she didn't know the words. "She passed 3 weeks ago," the woman added gently. "She left something for you." "Property." Ray blinked. She didn't even own a damn phone. "She owned land," the woman said. "Up on Coldbone Ridge. A house partially built into the mountain. Technically registered as an off-grid homestead." That made Ray laugh, but it cracked halfway out of his throat. That old woman couldn't keep a fridge running, and now she's leaving me a house in a rock. The woman didn't flinch. "It's yours. No taxes, no liens. Just a key and coordinates." Ray didn't want to take the envelope, but Ellie stirred in his arms, murmuring in her sleep, and something in him folded. He reached out and took it. The paper was cold, real, unapologetically real. Inside was a map, hand-sketched and photocopied with handwritten notes in the margins. Blue vein louder near the north wall. And one line in her unmistakable looping script: "If you're still listening, then it's still calling." Milo growled. Not loud, not warning. But something else. Something old. Ray looked at the dog. "You feel that?" The wind shifted, and for a moment it didn't feel like cold anymore. It felt like breath. They left town the next morning. It took everything Ray had: gas from a stranger's lawnmower tank, a half loaf of bread, and a borrowed backpack. But by noon, they were walking up the logging trail that led toward Coldbone Ridge. Ellie clutched his hand, her boots too big, her hat sliding down her ears. But she didn't complain. She just kept walking one foot in front of the other, because that's what Ray did, and that's what she'd learned. Milo trotted ahead, head low, ears flicking. Every few yards he stopped and looked back like he wasn't just guiding them, he was warning them not to turn around. The path narrowed into a corridor of ice and dead trees. The silence got heavier. Ray kept checking the paper. The coordinates made no sense, but Milo moved with certainty like something was pulling him. And then they saw it. A house or the ghost of one embedded into the ridge like it had grown there. Weather-beaten wood, iron-bolted joints. The rear wall was pure stone, raw gray basalt with veins like frozen rivers. A circular window fogged around the edges watched them like an eye. "This is it," Ellie whispered. Ray nodded. "I thought it'd be bigger." Ray chuckled, but it sounded too much like a cough. They stepped closer. Milo froze near the foundation, nose pressed to the stone. A low sound hummed from his throat. Ray laid a hand on the wall. It was warm, not hot, not glowing, just alive. The front door groaned open. Inside, dust motes floated through shafts of cold light. A stove, a pile of quilts, shelves of jars and tools untouched, and a table, covered in maps, wires, diagrams. Ray stared. She wasn't crazy. Ellie stepped up beside him. Her eyes lit up. "This looks like science." Milo scratched at a floorboard, then looked up, whining once. Ray bent down, a seam in the wood, a handle recessed and hidden. He tugged. The board lifted. Beneath it, a metal-framed hatch, a rope ladder descending into darkness. Ellie grabbed his arm. "Are we going down?" Ray looked at the girl, then at the dog, then at the mountain. "Not yet," he said. "First we see what she left behind up here." But in the silence, as the wind died and the light flickered, one thought rang louder than all the rest. If this house is still breathing, what else is down there waiting to wake up? This place doesn't creak because it's old. It creaks because it's listening. That's what Ellie said the next morning, barefoot on the wooden floor, eyes still swollen from sleep. Her voice was flat, like she hadn't even meant to say it out loud. But once she did, Ray didn't move. He stood at the window watching the fog shift across the slope outside. The wind had died in the early morning hours, and now the trees stood like tall ghosts, still and solemn. It was too quiet. No birds, no melt, not even a breeze. Just the slow, ambient hum of something pressing in beneath the silence. Ray looked at his daughter. "Where'd you hear that?" Ellie blinked, then shrugged. "I don't know. I think I dreamed it. Or maybe the house told me." He didn't like how naturally she said it. Like the idea of a house talking made sense to her. Like it belonged. He turned back to the room. They'd spent the night curled up by the old stove bundled in Eleanor's layered quilts, which still smelled faintly of pine ash and peppermint. He hadn't dared light a fire. Not yet. The chimney needed checking, and the last thing they needed was a smoke-filled collapse before breakfast. Milo had kept watch, pacing the perimeter with his usual silent rhythm. But sometime near dawn, he stopped at the back wall, the stone portion, and just sat there, watching, listening. Ray was starting to think the dog heard things none of them could. He made coffee on a battered portable burner he'd salvaged from the van weeks ago. The smell cut through the frost and the dust, and for a moment the cabin almost felt normal, lived in. Not like a tomb. The table in the center of the room was still cluttered with Eleanor's notes. Ray picked one up. It was a crude sketch of the ridge marked with blue lines that zigzagged like veins. Arrows pointed toward symbols he couldn't decode. Near the bottom, her handwriting looped off the page with a final message. Don't trust what stands still. Still, things are hiding. He ran his thumb over the ink. This wasn't just geology. It was obsession. The morning light broke clean through the window, lighting up the corner where a wide shelf held dozens of jars, some with dried herbs, some with what looked like minerals, and one holding a small faded figurine carved from stone. A river spirit, maybe, or just something Eleanor picked up at a gas station gift shop. Hard to tell with her. Ellie moved around the space like a girl stepping through a museum built just for her. She picked up a cracked compass from the mantel, flipped open a brass lighter that still sparked, and finally found the one photograph in the whole house. A young Eleanor standing at the ridge's edge, face half in shadow, the mountain behind her like a wave frozen mid-crash. "Dad?" Ellie asked quietly. "Yeah." "She wasn't crazy, was she?" Ray exhaled through his nose. "No," he said. "I think maybe the rest of us were just late to catch up." Milo barked once, sharp, focused. He stood facing the back corner again, ears perked. Then he walked toward the wall, sniffed at the baseboard, and started pawing gently at the edge of a cabinet bolted into the stone. Ray went to him. Behind the cabinet was a narrow crack almost invisible unless the light hit it right. He crouched and ran his hand along it. There was a groove, a latch. He pressed it. A hollow click. The cabinet popped loose from the wall. It swung open to reveal not shelves but a deep-set alcove cut directly into the basalt. Inside was a coiled black wire, a metal box with dials, and a pair of thick, scuffed headphones. A label etched onto the device. Hydrophonic Listening Array. Verge 2.0. Ray whistled low. "You ever seen something like that before?" Ellie asked. He nodded slowly. "Only in documentaries." "What's it do?" "It listens to water." Ellie tilted her head. But why Ray didn't have an answer. He plugged in the headphones, adjusted the dials, and slowly slid them over his ears. Static at first. Then beneath it, something else. A rhythm. Not human. Not music. But not random either. Like the sound of breath moving through a hollow lung. Like the slow thrum of pressure building beneath the earth's skin. And layered beneath that, something sharper. Clicks, no beats. Short, clipped, symmetrical. A pattern. He yanked the headphones off. "Dad," Ellie said. Ray looked at her, eyes wide. "It's alive." "What is this mountain?" Ellie didn't look surprised. Instead, she walked over to the table, picked up another map, and pointed to a spot marked with a small, looping blue spiral. "This was on the page in her notebook last night," she said. "Same shape. It looked like a listening ear." Ray took the map. His thumb rested over a penciled line beneath the spiral. Blue vein, volatile. He sat down hard on the edge of the cot. "She wasn't studying rocks," he muttered. "She was tracking pressure, flow, patterns, like she was treating the mountain like it had a pulse." Milo barked again. This time his nose pointed toward the trapdoor they found the night before. Ray stood. He wasn't ready. Not yet. But something had shifted. The air. The weight in the room. Ellie was staring at the floor. "This place doesn't creak because it's old," she said again, more quietly this time. "It creaks because it's listening." Ray met her eyes. "Then we better figure out what it's waiting to hear." Outside, the fog began to thicken again. The sunlight dimmed. Ray walked over to the trapdoor, knelt and ran his fingers along the edge. It was colder than the rest of the floor. not just from lack of insulation, but as if the mountain was holding its breath beneath them. He looked up at Milo. "Tomorrow," he said. Milo sat down, tail sweeping once against the boards, and gave the tiniest, most deliberate nod Ray had ever seen from a dog. They would rest. They would prepare. But they were going down that ladder. And whatever Eleanor had built, whatever she'd left behind, it wasn't just a message. It was a warning. If the earth has a pulse, this is where it beats. The rope ladder groaned under Ray's weight, each rung slick with decades of dust and cold air. He moved slowly, flashlight clenched between his teeth, his boots pressing into rock that felt unnervingly warm for a space so deep in stone. Above him, Milo waited, tail twitching, peering down into the dark with a soldier's focus. Ray wasn't sure what made him go first, instinct pride or fear of what his daughter might hear if he didn't. But either way, he was halfway down now and the air had started to change. It was denser, heavier. It smelled faintly of copper and wet moss. And under it all was that same soft vibration he felt through the cabin floor the day before. This wasn't a basement. This was something else. When his boots hit the ground, the stone beneath him shifted faintly, like settling breath. He looked around. The room was carved straight into the mountain, reinforced with timber beams that bowed with age but hadn't yet snapped. The walls shimmered with mineral veins and condensation. A single lantern, solar-powered by the look of it, hung from a rusted hook near the low ceiling, giving off a weak, flickering glow. Beside it, scrawled in charcoal across the wall, were words he recognized in Eleanor's script. "The mountain doesn't speak in words. It speaks in warnings." He turned as Milo descended expertly down the ladder, using a practiced mix of climbing and sliding. The dog's paws hit the ground with a quiet thump. He sniffed the air, sneezed once, then sat upright, alert but calm. Ray gave a long exhale. Then he turned toward the workbench. The hydrophone sat center, slightly off-kilter, with a thick cord leading to a pair of battered headphones. Notes were pinned to the wall above it, pressure graphs annotated frequency patterns, hand-drawn water routes, branching like capillaries through the mountain's core. But it was the map on the far side of the bench that held him. It wasn't a topographical map. It was alive with blue ink loops, spirals, convergences, each marked with timestamps and strange notations like shift, echo spike, 13 a.m., or vein response to surface pressure. And then one that chilled him, tremor registered during truck passage. North access. Not natural. Ray sat slowly, dragging the stool beneath him. His hands moved without thinking, adjusting dials, flipping switches. He slid on the headphones and closed his eyes. Static. Then a low thrum, like wind behind water. Then another tone, sharper, pulsing in time. It was a pattern. The sound wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate, predictable, rhythmic, a living system. The breath caught in Ray's throat. For the first time in years, he felt the same awe he used to feel under the hood of a machine he didn't understand yet. That quiet certainty, something is working here. He pulled off the headphones and stared at the hydrophone. "If the earth has a pulse," he whispered, "this is where it beats." Milo gave a soft huff, moving toward the back corner of the room. He sniffed the air, then began to paw at a small pile of discarded tarps. Something metallic clinked underneath. Ray walked over and helped pull them back. A set of vials, glass capped, each filled with water samples, some clear, some cloudy. One a sickly green, each labeled with dates, locations, annotations. He picked up one. North Drift Line, February 2023. Slight discoloration. Another South Fork, March 2023. Metallic tang. There were dozens. And near the bottom of the crate, a sealed envelope with a handwritten label, "Contingency Show Mercer if system destabilizes." Ray tucked the envelope into his jacket. Behind him, Milo let out a low growl, not aggressive, just alert. He turned fast. Nothing had moved. No new sounds. But something felt different, as if the vibrations in the floor had shifted, like the mountain had registered his presence. He turned back to the hydrophone. The line on the dial had changed, no longer smooth, but jagged. Spike. Dip. Spike again. He slipped the headphones back on. This time the sound wasn't a pulse. It was interference, machinery, something artificial disrupting the natural hum, a low grind like gears turning deep beneath rock, and something else underneath it, like a groan. He yanked the headphones off. Milo stood stiff, hackles raised. He walked toward the wall near the eastern corner, sniffed hard, then sat head tilted, eyes narrowed. Ray stepped toward him. The wall was marked. Barely visible under mineral deposits was a symbol scratched in with something sharp. A circle split by a single line down the middle. The same symbol from Eleanor's maps upstairs. He pressed his palm to it. The stone was warmer here. A low vibration ticked up through his fingers like a heartbeat caught inside a rock. The machinery hum returned through the wall, faint but undeniable. Someone was drilling. Now. Somewhere close. He backed up. "Come on," he said to Milo. "We're done down here for now." They climbed out fast. Milo first, then Ray, his legs trembling not from the climb, but from the realization settling in his gut like ice. Back upstairs, Ellie sat cross-legged by the fireless stove reading Eleanor's notebook. She looked up. "Did you hear it?" Ray blinked. "What, the sound?" "The mountain talking." He didn't answer, just nodded once. Ellie stood and walked over. She was right, wasn't she, Grandma? He looked at her and didn't know whether to lie or not. She wasn't just right, he said. She was ahead. Ellie leaned against his side. "I think we're supposed to finish it." Ray looked out the window. The fog had thickened again, but this time it wasn't hiding them. It was wrapping around them. The next morning, Ray stood at the front of the cabin watching the ridge line. Something flickered in the woods. Headlights. A truck just visible between the trees. Black. Idling. Ray didn't move. He didn't wave. He just watched. And from behind him, Ellie said softly, "They're watching too. It's not just a sound. It's scared." Ellie said it from the threshold of the listening room, her small figure half lit by the morning haze spilling through the cabin windows. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Ray like a blade wrapped in ice. He turned toward her hand, still hovering over the hydrophone's control dial. "What did you say?" Ellie shrugged, stepping into the room like she already belonged there. Her feet patted softly on the wood, and her eyes locked onto the equipment, as if it were a puzzle she already knew how to solve. The sound. Down there. It's not just noise. It's scared. Ray exhaled, leaning back on the stool. "Ellie, it's just pressure waves. You're reading too much into—" "No," she interrupted without anger. "It's scared. I can feel it. It doesn't want to be alone." He didn't know what to say to that. A week ago, his daughter had never seen a hydrophone or even thought about underground rivers. Now she was quoting Eleanor's notes in her sleep and walking around this cabin like it had raised her. "You're listening too much," he muttered, standing. "You spend enough time around your grandma's notebooks. and you start hearing things that aren't there. Ellie didn't answer. She reached out and touched the side of the device, fingers brushing the casing like it might respond to kindness. Milo, sitting just beside her, let out a quiet sigh, then rested his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. Even the dog was calmer around her. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Ray feel like an intruder in his own bloodline. Later that day, they returned to town. Supplies were running low, and Ray needed answers. He stopped by the library on Main Street, an aging brick building with ivy curling up the side and paint peeling from the windowsills. The sign above the door read, Silver Hollow Public Library, Estunt 1898, but it might as well have said, last place anyone looks for the truth. Inside, he found June Larkins reshelving a box of old geological reports. Her silver-streaked ponytail bobbed as she moved, and when she saw Ray, her eyes narrowed with something between suspicion and recognition. "Ray Callahan," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Thought you were a ghost story." "Still breathing," Ray replied. "Mostly." June dusted off her hands and leaned on the counter. "You're staying up at Eleanor's place, huh?" "Brave." Ray hesitated. "Did you know what she was doing up there? What she was listening to?" June's eyes softened just slightly. "I knew she was listening. I didn't know what she heard." Ray reached into his coat and slid a copy of one of Eleanor's hydrophone readouts across the counter. "She heard something. And now my daughter's hearing it too." June looked at the paper, then back at Ray. "You don't believe in that kind of thing?" "No," Ray said. "But the mountain doesn't care what I believe." She stared at him for a long time, then finally nodded toward the back room. "Come with me." In the archives, June pulled a cardboard box from the shelf marked E. Monroe, 1997-2008. Inside were letters, copies of survey complaints, and a half-written report titled Preliminary Findings, the Blue Vein Hypothesis. Ray flipped through it, reading Eleanor's careful notes. References to pressure shifts, acoustic anomalies, localized soil fractures, all backed with rudimentary but meticulous data. At the bottom of one page was a name that stopped him cold. Darius Vance. "Who's this?" Ray asked. June gave a short breath through her nose. "Used to be a miner. Worked the ridge. Eleanor said he knew where the rock cracked before anyone else did. After she went quiet, he did too." Ray looked up. "Where do I find him? Don't know," she said. "He doesn't come into town much. But if he's watching, and he probably is, he'll find you." That night back at the cabin, Ellie sat near the sealed stove, sketching in a worn notebook. Her drawings weren't childish. They were precise. Curving lines that mimicked topographical maps. One of them caught Ray's eye. "You drawing what you saw in Grandma's books?" he asked. Ellie shook her head. "No. It's what I heard. In the humming." Ray moved closer. The drawing showed a spiral inside a larger spiral, and at the center, an ear. He swallowed. "Ellie, when you said the sound was scared, what do you mean?" She looked up at him, all seriousness and stillness. "I think something's hurting it." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The thing in the mountain. The part that moves. It's not just rock, Dad. It's more. Ray couldn't sleep that night. Not because of what Ellie had said, but because when he lay on the floor, blankets bundled tight, and Milo curled at his feet, he could feel it too. That vibration, that rhythmic pressure beneath the wood. It wasn't random. It was reacting. Around midnight, Milo sat up, ears pricked. He gave a low growl, not hostile, just alert. Ray followed his gaze out the window. Far below the ridge, headlights again. A black truck, no markings, no movement, just sitting, watching. Ray stood and pulled on his coat. "You're not going out there," Ellie said from behind him. He turned. "I'm just looking." Ellie stepped toward the window, her face pale in the moonlight. She squinted at the vehicle, then said quietly, "That's not a local truck. That's one of the ones Grandma used to watch." Ray stiffened. "How do you know that?" Ellie turned to him, her voice steady. "Because she told me." The room fell dead silent. Ray stared at her. "In a dream?" he asked. Ellie nodded once. "In the hum." Ray didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Milo paced near the cabin door. When Ray opened it, he found a single envelope lying on the porch, sealed with wax. Inside was a note written in rough block letters. "Stop listening, or they'll come stop it for you." He stared at the words for a long time, then looked at his daughter, who was once again drawing spirals in her notebook. And he knew they weren't just chasing Eleanor's past. They were standing on the edge of something Eleanor never got to finish. You don't poke a sleeping ridge unless you want it to bury you. That's what the man finally said after 30 minutes of silence and 3 drags off a cigarette that smelled more like paper than tobacco. Ray stood in the half-collapsed doorway of Darius Vance's shack, the wind at his back cutting through every layer of flannel he owned. He'd been searching all morning, asking through town, following dead-end trails, and finally ending up on this gravel road that turned to mud before the woods swallowed it whole. According to June, Darius hadn't been seen in town since Eleanor's funeral. Ray understood why now. The shack was more bunker than home, piles of scrap metal, old copper wiring jars filled with nails and dirt, and a pair of mud-crusted boots that looked older than Ray. The only light came from a grimy oil lamp flickering on a warped table near the stove. The air inside was thick, heavy, and smelled like history no one wanted to remember. Vance didn't look at him when he spoke, just stared at the worn cassette tape turning in an old battery-powered player. The sound it played was low and strange, like the inside of a cave breathing. A pulse, but not a heart. Something deeper, slower, hungrier. Ray finally broke the silence. "She told you, didn't she, about the vein?" Vance nodded once. "She didn't just tell me. She showed me." Ray stepped closer. "What did she find down there?" The older man's eyes drifted over the cassette player like it held the memory in its magnetic coils. "We were running seismic lines under Ridge 6, just exploratory back in '08. Found a fault line deeper than usual, but it wasn't behaving normal. Pressure would build, then vanish, like it was bleeding itself, but not along the natural fissures." Ray sat down across from him, careful not to knock over the pile of wires on the chair. "So what was it?" Vance tapped the player. "It's what your grandmother called the blue vein. She said it was geological, but reactive, like the Earth had a nervous system." Ray blinked. "That's not science." "No," Vance said, "but it felt like truth." Ray pulled a folder from his bag and placed it on the table. Inside were the maps, water samples, and hydrophone readouts he and Ellie had sorted the night before. Vance flipped through them slowly, expression unreadable. When he reached a page marked with a spike in acoustic pressure 3 days ago, he stiffened. This wasn't here last time I monitored it," Vance muttered. "They're active again?" Hydrocore Ray asked. The old man nodded. "They shut the operation down officially 10 years back, but I've seen the trucks come through the switchbacks every winter like clockwork. Night runs, no paper trail. They think no one's watching." Ray leaned forward. "What are they doing?" "Pressure release," Vance said. "They tap the vein in shallow spots, bleed off energy, then reseal it. It prevents tremors, but it's not safe. Think of it like venting steam off a boiling pot without knowing how much pressure is left inside. One wrong release and he made a fist and opened it sharply. Ray closed his eyes, the image immediate. A cascade. A chain reaction. Like pulling one pin too early in a wall of explosives. Vance slid a yellowed photo across the table. It showed a field of fractured earth trees toppled sideways like dominoes, a tear in the soil wide enough to swallow a house. This happened up in Fisher Ridge, Vance said. 3 years ago. They said it was a sinkhole, but I heard it the night before it fell. The hum changed pitch. Got desperate. Ray stared at the photo. Ellie said the sound was scared. She's not wrong. Ray's hands clenched around the folder. She's been drawing spirals in her sleep, hearing things. Eleanor started at the same age. What does that mean? Vance sighed. Some people are more attuned. Call it instinct. Call it generational trauma passed through marrow. I don't know. But when that vein pulses wrong, it doesn't just echo through rock. It echoes through people, especially the ones who've listened before. Ray stood pacing. I want to stop it. Whatever hydrocore's doing, I need to shut it down. You can't go to the press. They'll laugh you out of the county. Then help me make them listen. Vance took a deep drag and stood. There's one place they never tapped. Eleanor marked it on her old charts, but said it was too unstable to approach. She thought it might be the source. Ray's heart kicked. Where Vance walked to a wall lined with maps and dragged his finger down a torn trail chart. 1/2 mile below Coldbone. There's an old survey tunnel, caved in 30 years ago, but the opening's still reachable. If the hum's rising, that's where it'll be loudest. Ray stared at the map. Then that's where I'll go. Vance grabbed his arm. If you go in there, take the hydrophone. And don't stay long. The pressure down there can mess with your head. It's like it wants you to stay. Ray nodded once. I've lived through worse. Vance didn't smile. No. You haven't. Back in the truck, Ray gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Milo sat beside him, ears twitching as the engine sputtered to life. The snow had begun again, fine and soft, blanketing the forest in silence. When he pulled up to the cabin an hour later, Ellie was waiting on the porch, her sketch pad tucked under one arm, eyes clear and too old for 9. You found him, she said simply. Ray nodded. She held up the notebook, showing him a fresh page. It was the survey tunnel, a spiral drawn over its mouth like a seal. Ray looked at her. You knew. Ellie stared out toward the ridge. I dreamed it last night. But it wasn't a warning this time. Ray's voice was low. What was it? She met his eyes. It was calling us. You think they buried it. But it's not beneath us anymore. It's around us. The wind had died to a whisper by the time Ray and Ellie reached the ridge. Snow fell light and slow, swirling in the air like ash. Milo trotted ahead, weaving between boulders and collapsed brush, leading them along the faded trail that curled around the base of Coldbone. The air was wrong, thick still, and heavy with something unspoken. Even the birds were silent. Ray had packed light, the hydrophone, Eleanor's field map, a flashlight with backup batteries, and a crowbar slung across his back. Ellie carried her own notebook, a pair of binoculars, and a coil of red string. When he asked why, she only said, to mark the way back. They reached the mouth of the collapsed tunnel by mid-afternoon. A wide slab of stone angled down into the ridge like a sealed jaw. Around the entrance, the air shimmered faintly, just enough to make Ray pause. You see that? He asked. Ellie nodded. It's vibrating. He crouched and placed his palm against the rock. It felt alive. A low-frequency hum pushed up into his bones, not loud, but dense. It reminded him of being in the engine room of an old ship surrounded by pressure and motion you couldn't escape. Ray cleared the brush from the entrance. Beneath the dirt, the original wood framing had rotted out, but the stone tunnel still opened maybe 3 feet high, barely large enough to crawl. He looked at Ellie. You don't have to go, I do, she said firm. Milo gave a quiet whine, then stepped inside first, vanishing into the dark like it was nothing. Ray turned on the flashlight and followed. The air inside dropped 10 degrees immediately. It smelled like wet granite, old oil, and something sharp like static before a storm. The walls glistened with mineral sheen, and the ground sloped downward faster than he expected. They had to duck low, crawling at some points, as the tunnel narrowed and twisted. The red string unraveled behind Ellie like a lifeline. After 20 minutes, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber, rough, irregular, obviously natural. At the center stood a half-collapsed survey station, rusted tripods, a crushed generator, and one toppled drum of seismic cable. But none of that mattered. What caught their eyes was the wall across the chamber. Spirals, dozens of them, etched into the stone. Not carved, not painted. Burned. The rock itself had been scorched into shapes, some tight and perfect, others wild and stretched like they were melting mid-turn. Ray shined the light across the surface, and the spirals shimmered like fresh ink. Ellie stepped forward. It's a language. Ray moved beside her. You mean symbols? No. I mean it's speaking. Look, each one matches a frequency pulse Grandma recorded. These aren't just images. They're timestamps, like a logbook, written in sound. Ray stared at her. How do you know that Ellie put her hand to the stone? I can feel it. Ray set up the hydrophone on the flattest surface he could find. The moment it activated, the signal spiked. A deep rhythm poured through the headphones, slower than before, but more distinct. Not just a beat. A call. Low. Sad. Hollow. Then another sound layered over it. Scraping. Metal on stone. But it wasn't from the headphones. Ray pulled them off and looked around. It was coming from the tunnel. He snapped off the flashlight. Total darkness swallowed them whole. They waited in silence, breathing shallow. Then lights. 2 beams bouncing down the tunnel. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Ellie gripped his hand. Ray grabbed the hydrophone, packed it in seconds, motioned for Ellie to reel in the string. Milo growled, once low, quiet, controlled. The figures reached the chamber entrance. Men in black. Full gear. No markings. Ray whispered, "Move." They slid into a narrow split in the chamber wall, just wide enough to conceal them in the rock. The men scanned the room. One carried a tablet. Another had a handheld scanner that beeped softly as it moved across the burned spirals. Readings high, one muttered. They've been activated again. Check for recording devices, the other said. One of them moved toward the old survey equipment, pulled out a crowbar, smashed the remaining tripods. Destroy everything. We report to Mercer at base camp after extraction. Ray clenched his jaw. Ellie whispered in his ear. They think it's still sleeping. Ray shook his head slowly. No. They're afraid it's waking up. The scanner beeped louder. Movement in the far tunnel, one of them said. We're not alone. Ray pulled Ellie tight. Milo didn't growl. This time he stood dead still, ears forward. The men advanced toward the crevice. Ray did the only thing he could. He snapped the flashlight on high beam and hurled it across the chamber. The beam exploded against the opposite wall. The men turned fast, chasing the light. Ray grabbed Ellie's hand. Go. They crawled back into the side passage. It was narrower, sharper. The red string ran out after only 15 feet. But ahead the sound changed. The hum was stronger. The rock was warmer. They emerged into a smaller hollow barely 6 feet across. Inside was a pool of water glowing faint blue. It pulsed gently like breath. Ray stared. This wasn't just groundwater. This was the source. The blue vein. Ellie stood at the edge. It's awake! Behind them, voices shouted. Gunmetal footsteps on stone. Ray did what he had to. He shoved the hydrophone into the water and hit record. The sound blasted through the chamber so loud it shook the walls. The men shouted, scrambled back. The spirals began to glow. Ray grabbed Ellie. Back. Now. They ran, following the faint red thread, retracing every twist, every dip. Milo led the way like a missile. Behind them, the tunnel groaned. Stone shifted. The mountain was no longer listening. It was speaking. They burst out into the open air as the first rumble shook the ground. Dust blew from the collapsed tunnel mouth. A deep roar echoed through the ridge. Ellie collapsed into the snow, panting. Ray looked back at the sealed stone and said, breathless, "You think they buried it, but it's not beneath us anymore. It's around us. The warning isn't coming through the mountain anymore. It's moving. It's in us now." Ray didn't speak the entire ride back from Coldbone. Neither did Ellie. The truck's tires crunched through snow and gravel, each rotation echoing louder than it should have. The hydrophone case sat between them, its red recording light still blinking like a heartbeat. Ray's hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles pale against the chill. Milo lay in the back seat, eyes fixed out the window, ears twitching every few seconds. Ellie finally broke the silence. "They knew we were there." Ray nodded. "They were listening too." He looked at her, voice low. "They were watching. They didn't come to study the spiral wall. They came to erase it." They reached the cabin just as the last orange sliver of sun bled behind the trees. Shadows stretched long across the snow. Something about the light felt wrong, too soft, too blue, like the mountain was filtering it differently now. Inside, Ray unlatched the hydrophone case and removed the tape cartridge. He walked straight to the wood stove and pried open the false bottom Eleanor had once used to hide her field notes. Inside, behind a loose panel, was a backup recorder she'd stashed, analog battery-powered, impossible to hack. He inserted the cartridge. The sound that came out was unlike anything he'd ever heard. It wasn't just the hum anymore. It had shifted, evolved. Now it came in waves, almost like breathing. Low pulses, rising tones, tremors so subtle they danced just under the human range. But buried deep within it was something unmistakable. A voice. No words, no language, but intention. Fear. Grief. Urgency. Ray stared at the speaker, his whole body frozen. "The warning isn't coming through the mountain anymore," he said softly. "It's moving. It's in us now." Ellie nodded slowly. "It used to echo through the ridge. Now it echoes through people." Ray stood up abruptly. "We can't sit on this. If I'm right, if what you heard is real, then they've already triggered something." "You want to go public?" Ellie asked. Ray hesitated. He'd been a nobody for years, a broke father with nothing but bad credit and hand-me-down trauma, Who would believe him? Who would care? And yet, they had the data, they had the sound, they had witnesses, him, Ellie, even Darius. But they also had a countdown ticking underground. And no idea how long was left on the clock. I need to get this to someone, he said finally. Someone who can make people listen. He called June. 2 hours later, she met them at the back of the town library. The snow had stopped, but the wind carried that same unnatural chill that had settled over Coldbone. Ray handed her the tape. June listened through an old pair of studio headphones. Her eyes didn't move the entire 10 minutes it played. When it ended, she exhaled and set the headphones down carefully. How much do you want people to know? She asked. All of it. She glanced at Ellie. Including her, Ray looked at his daughter sitting quiet on the floor, sketching spirals in the corner of an old map. She already knows more than any of us, he said. And she's not afraid of it. We shouldn't be either. June tapped her finger on the desk. I can reach out to someone at the Herald. An old reporter who covered the mine collapses in '03. Might take a day to set up. 2 max. Ray nodded. But Ellie stood up suddenly. We don't have 2 days. They both looked at her. What do you mean? Ray asked. She turned to the window. It moved again. Ray froze. The sound, no. The pressure. The vein. It shifted last night. Toward the east slope. June's mouth tightened. That's close to the reservoir. Ray's brain kicked into overdrive. If the vein breaches the reservoir, it won't just flood, it'll destabilize the whole slope. That would bury half the town. June grabbed her coat. I'm calling Sam Royce. He runs emergency management. He's a friend, but he won't believe it without proof, Ray said. Ellie whispered. Then we have to give them something they can't ignore. That night back at the cabin, Ray and Ellie sat by the fire sketching out their plan. They couldn't wait for media. Couldn't wait for Hydrocore to make the next move. They had to make noise. Ray pulled out Eleanor's shortwave transmitter. A busted relic of Cold War paranoia, but still functional. With the right frequency and timing, it could broadcast audio over local airwaves, emergency bands, even interrupting ham radio frequencies. He tuned it slowly, fingers trembling. When he activated the broadcast, Ellie stood beside him holding the microphone. Her voice came soft but certain. This is a warning from Coldbone Ridge. This is not a hoax. There is movement underground. There is sound, pressure, change. Something buried is waking, and it's calling out. If you hear this, listen. If you feel it, don't ignore it. We don't want to be right. But we are. Ray hit play on the hydrophone's recording. The hum bled through the transmitter, clear, eerie, rising. It echoed through static, warbled over the AM line, then vanished into the snowy night. They sat in silence. Milo stirred by the door. Then came the knock. 3 short raps. Ray stood, opened the door. It wasn't a stranger. It was Darius. You better come outside, he said. Ray followed him into the night. At the edge of the ridge, the trees were swaying not from wind, but from something deeper, something below. And far in the distance, toward the reservoir, a faint orange glow began to rise through the trees. Not fire, not light. Something else. If the ridge is alive, then this is its heartbeat and it's skipping. The orange glow near the reservoir didn't flicker like fire. It pulsed steady and rhythmic like breath. It rose low and slow behind the tree line, illuminating the undersides of the skeletal branches in a ghostly wash. The ridge, which had always loomed silent and solid above Silver Hollow, now vibrated with a pressure Ray didn't need instruments to feel. He stood with Darius on the edge of the woods, Ellie at his side, Milo tense at their feet. "What the hell is that?" Ray whispered. Darius shook his head. "It's not fire. That light, it's the vein. You pushed it awake." Ray clenched his jaw. "No. Hydrocore did. We just started listening." The ground beneath them gave a gentle shudder. Not a quake. A breath. Ellie closed her eyes as if sinking with it. "It's scared again," she murmured. "But it's trying to speak louder." Back inside the cabin, Ray scrambled to gather what little they had left: Eleanor's seismic maps, the hydrophone recordings, June's contact at the Herald's office. They were out of time. Logic and permission weren't options anymore. June arrived 15 minutes later, headlights cutting through snow like a scalpel. She'd brought a battered satellite uplink from her journalism days, ancient but functional. "I couldn't reach the Herald," she said, panting from the cold. "Phones are down in half the county. Someone's jamming the lines." Ray didn't hesitate. "Then we'll make our own signal." Together they set up the satellite relay outside the cabin, pointing it toward the open sky. Ray loaded the hydrophone's most recent pulse, recorded only hours ago, from the vane's core into the transmission unit. The signal hissed for a moment, then settled into a rhythmic beat. It didn't sound like geology. It sounded like something dying. "I can encode a burst transmission," June said. "It'll push the recording to open networks frequencies across emergency services, amateur radio, even media inboxes. It'll flood inboxes across 3 counties." Ray nodded. "Do it." As she worked, Ellie stood at the edge of the woods again. The trees swayed without wind, and the air smelled like wet stone and copper. She held her sketchbook tight, eyes focused on the glow behind the hills. "It's not just light," she said softly. "It's signaling." Ray turned. "Signaling who?" She didn't answer. That night, as the first wave of the transmission rippled through the air, Ray took the truck and drove. Fast. Toward the reservoir. Toward the glow. Toward whatever hydrocore was trying to finish. Darius rode shotgun gear in the back. Ellie had stayed with June, her small voice echoing before he left. "If it feels like it's listening, don't lie to it." Ray had promised he wouldn't. As they climbed the old mining road, the hum returned louder this time, bleeding up from the tires into the steering wheel. The pressure inside the cabin thickened like climbing altitude without oxygen. Ray's ears popped. Darius leaned forward, scanning the ridgeline. Then they saw it. Hydrocore's temporary base camp, camouflaged trailers, equipment sheds, a tower of portable lights that flickered with an uneasy stutter. The company logo had been stripped from most gear, but it didn't matter. The dig was active. "Idiots," Darius muttered. "They're drilling the fault line. Right over the source." Ray pulled into the tree line and killed the headlights. They approached on foot, weaving between boulders and root clusters, Milo moving silent at Ray's heel. From behind a ridge, they could see the worksite clearly. There were 5 workers. 2 operated a massive boring machine, its arms vibrating, unnaturally gouging into the rock face. One stood by a control panel monitoring seismic readouts that twitched like a heart monitor mid-heart attack. And 2 others stood near a trailer, talking. One of them was Logan Mercer. Ray's blood ran cold. Mercer's face was calm, but his voice sharp. "We're on borrowed time. If the vein cracks while we're still pumping, this entire range goes down. Finish extraction and seal it." Darius hissed under his breath. "They know. They know what's down there." Ray's hands balled into fists. "Then they're not just drilling, they're gambling." He didn't wait for permission. Ray moved fast and low, ducking behind equipment until he reached the edge of the nearest generator. He yanked a wire from the side and stuffed it into his pocket, then did the same to the next. Sparks flew, lights flickered, the sound of drilling slowed. What the someone shouted. Ray moved again now behind the portable lighting rig. He slammed his crowbar into the fuel line. It burst. Flames jumped. Smoke poured upward. Workers scattered. Mercer turned, yelling orders, unaware Ray was only 10 feet away. Ray stepped into the light. "You're done here." Mercer's face drained. "Callahan, I've got proof. Audio, readings, seismic patterns. And I just sent all of it out across every open line in the county." Mercer regained composure too quickly. "Then you've just sparked a panic. People won't understand this." You're endangering all of them," Ray roared, stepping closer. "You've been bleeding pressure out of a living system for years. And now it's collapsing." "Living," Mercer sneered. "It's rock. Earth moves. That's all it does." Ray shook his head. "Then why does it remember?" The ground shuddered. Not a tremor. A spasm. The bore drill snapped like a twig. The entire hillside groaned a low, sickening twist of stone. Mercer paled. "Seal the shaft." Now too late. The ridge erupted. Not an explosion, an upheaval. Rock pushed outward like something underneath had had enough. A geyser of steam and dust burst through the core of the worksite. The trailers split like toy models. Alarms screamed. Workers ran. Ray was thrown back into a snowdrift wind knocked from his lungs. Darius grabbed his arm and hauled him up. Milo barked wildly, running toward the tree line. "We have to move," Darius shouted. They ran. Behind them the glow intensified. And then silence. Not peace, not safety. Absence. The kind that happens when something huge takes one final breath before the scream. From the ridge below, Ray looked back. The hillside had changed shape. A massive spiral was now carved into it, visible even through the darkness. The vein had marked the earth. "It's trying to warn us," Ray said, gasping. Darius stared at the mark. "No. It's begging. It doesn't want to die alone." They returned to the cabin after midnight. Ellie stood outside, her notebook in her arms. She didn't look surprised to see them. Ray dropped to his knees in front of her. "We stopped the drill, but I don't think we stopped it." She knelt too. "It's not done. It's hurt. And now it's remembering everything they did." Ray looked at the mountain, now silent again. "If the ridge is alive, then this is its heartbeat," he said. "And it's skipping." Ellie nodded. June stepped out onto the porch. "Phones are lighting up across the region. Your signal hit, but it's chaos. Half the town thinks it's an attack." Ray didn't flinch. "Then we tell the truth. We tell them it's something deeper than that." Ellie whispered something older. Ray looked at the horizon. "They'll come for us now." June nodded grimly. "And not just hydrocore. The spiral isn't a symbol. It's a map. And it's still drawing itself." Snow still blanketed the Coldbone Ridge, but something beneath it had shifted, subtle at first, like a breath caught in the throat of the mountain. Then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses against your chest and makes you feel watched. Ray stood at the edge of the carved spiral boots dug into ice-laced gravel eyes, tracing the massive grooves etched into the slope from the night before. The pattern was ancient in shape, but fresh in the way the stone gleamed like it had been melted open instead of cut. It radiated warmth that steamed the snow around it, a perfect spiral hundreds of feet wide. Ellie stood next to him, sketchbook in hand, quietly copying the pattern. But halfway through, she paused. "It's not finished." Ray looked over. "What do you mean?" She held up the page, comparing it to the lines in the earth. "This part, this curve here, it shifted. Overnight." "Look." Ray frowned. She was right. The outer loop of the spiral had extended, bending slightly more eastward away from the reservoir and toward the older uninhabited slope that had long been marked unstable. The section hadn't existed 12 hours ago, but now it did. Darius crouched near the spiral's edge. He ran a hand along the groove. This wasn't just a pressure release. Something directed this. "Whatever's down there, it's intelligent." Ray's voice was quiet. "No, not just intelligent. It remembers." June stood back, camera slung over her shoulder. "So what does that make this a warning?" Ellie shook her head. "A message." Ray stepped closer, reading the spiral again with new eyes. "The spiral isn't a symbol," he said slowly. "It's a map, and it's still drawing itself." They stared at it in silence. Ellie turned back to her notebook and started to trace the extended path, hand moving almost faster than her eyes. She drew without hesitation, like she'd seen it before in dreams. Ray pulled the hydrophone from his pack, set it on the ground, and activated it. The hum had changed again. Less erratic, more rhythmic, like a heartbeat syncing with something external. Darius Ray said, "How far does that eastern slope go?" "Old quarry back there," the old man replied. "Hasn't been touched in 40 years. Caved in twice. Was never stable enough for drilling." Ray stood. "That's where it's pointing." June looked alarmed. "You're thinking of going into the spiral." "I'm thinking we follow where it leads. If it's drawing a path, it's showing us something," Ellie added quietly, "or someone." They packed fast. An hour later, the four of them, Ray, Ellie, Darius, and June, moved through the dense winter forest that skirted the eastern ridge. Milo led again, nose low, tail straight. Snow turned to wet moss underfoot. As they descended past an elevation line Ray recognized from Eleanor's maps, one she had labeled with a single word in faded pencil, threshold. The quarry came into view like a forgotten wound in the earth. Tall rock faces folded inward around a frozen depression shaped like a cracked bowl. Old machines rusted along the rim, half-buried trucks. Diggers corroded beyond recognition. The place had the look of something abandoned, not because it failed, but because it was forbidden. As they descended into the bowl, Ellie stopped. She knelt, brushed snow away with gloved hands, and revealed a single spiral, small, fresh, and glowing faintly blue. Darius knelt beside her. "This wasn't here last season. Hell, maybe not even yesterday." "It's guiding us," Ellie said, and she began walking in a new direction toward a natural cleft in the rocks near the northern lip of the quarry. Ray followed. Inside the cleft was a passage, a narrow throat in the stone no more than 5 feet high, descending at a shallow angle into the dark. Eleanor's map hadn't shown this. None of them had. They entered one by one, flashlights casting long shadows across the glistening walls. The deeper they went, the warmer the air grew, moist, almost humid. The hum returned stronger here, thrumming through their boots and into their chests. Milo whimpered once, then pressed forward faster, like he was being pulled. Then the chamber opened. It wasn't large, barely the size of a cabin, but its walls told stories. Spirals, hundreds, inlaid into the stone, not burned this time, but formed from embedded mineral veins that shimmered faint blue. Each was different, some layered, some sharp. some still incomplete. In the center of the chamber was a podium of natural stone, and on it, resting undisturbed, was a journal. Ray approached slowly, heart hammering. He picked it up and opened the cover. It was Eleanor's. The entries were dated over 15 years ago, notes about acoustic resonance pressure, anomalies, spiral frequency matching, and emotional states correlated to tremor patterns. But near the middle, the entries turned personal. The spiral reacts to presence. When I bring Ellie's mother near, it shifts. Not violently, but like it's adjusting, adapting. I think it's listening to blood. Ray's hands shook. He turned another page. If anything happens to me, tell Ray to follow the pattern. The final signal won't be loud. It'll be close. June stepped beside him, reading over his shoulder. She knew you'd come here. Ray nodded, barely able to breathe. At the bottom of the last page, a line was scrawled hastily. The spiral is memory. A living record. A pulse embedded in stone. If it finishes its pattern, we're out of time. Suddenly the chamber vibrated. Not like before. A thud from below. Ray dropped the journal and raised the hydrophone. The signal spiked. A low groan filled the chamber like tectonic plates grinding, but under it was something unmistakably human. A cry. Not mechanical. Not animal. A person. Milo barked sharply, ears locked on the far wall of the chamber. Ellie ran to it, pressed her hand against the spiral closest to the floor. It's a door. Ray joined her. The spiral was warm, pulsing. It's still drawing, Ellie said. We're standing in it now. Darius backed away. You open that we might not come back. Ray met his eyes. If we don't, no one else will. He pressed both hands to the spiral. The stone shifted, folded inward. A soft hiss of pressure released, and an opening appeared. Dark. Breathing. Alive. The tunnel breathed. It wasn't imagination. The air inside shifted in and out with a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. As Ray stepped through the spiral door, the sensation grew like the ridge itself had lungs, and they'd just entered its throat. Behind him, Ellie gripped her flashlight tightly, its beam bouncing across stone walls slick with condensation. June and Darius followed in silence, each step deliberate. Milo padded ahead low to the ground, tail rigid, ears flicking with every drop of sound. They moved downward. The walls curved with them, spiraling gently like the grooves on a seashell. No markings now, no ancient carvings, just smooth stone and the steady pulse of air that carried a faint vibration, an echo of the hum they'd followed since the beginning. Only now it wasn't just sound, it was language, it was memory. We weren't meant to find this place, Ray said quietly, but it was waiting for us. No one responded. The path leveled out, opening into a large chamber. The air warmed noticeably, not hot, but humid, metallic, and thick with pressure. At the center of the chamber was a pool glowing faint blue from beneath, like a geothermal vent. Its surface barely rippled, but the light from within pulsed in perfect sync with the vibrations under their feet. Ray stepped to the edge, looked in. Shapes moved beneath the surface, slow, swirling fluid like smoke under glass. But they weren't alive. They were images, fragments. Ellie joined him, eyes wide. It's showing us something. The water shifted. A town, flickering in the surface like a film reel, silver hollow decades ago. Lights from the mining operation, men in orange helmets, drill rigs punching holes into the earth. Then a pulse. The image flickered violently, people running, equipment shaking, A crack tearing across the earth. A face appeared, young Eleanor shouting without sound, recording readings on a shaking clipboard. Another pulse. The image blurred. Now a child. A woman holding her. Singing. Ellie recognized the tune before Ray did. It was her mother. Then it stopped. Ray staggered back. The pool returned to calm. "What the hell is this?" Darius whispered. "It's remembering for us." June looked pale. "It's more than that. It's archiving." Ray stared at the water. "This whole place is a memory vault, carved by pressure, preserved by rhythm. We're inside a living record." Ellie stepped closer again. "But it's not finished yet." Milo barked sharply. Not at the pool, but at the far wall. They turned. A doorway stood there, arched, organic in shape, like it had grown instead of been cut. Beyond it, a faint light flickered. Ray looked at the others. "This is deeper than Eleanor ever went." Ellie walked through first. The corridor narrowed again, but not like a tunnel. It felt smoother, more deliberate, like it had been invited into existence. At the end of the corridor was a chamber unlike the rest. The walls were covered in spirals, but not etched or carved. Grown. Veins of mineral blue, violet, even gold, twisted into the shape of spirals, some glowing, some dormant. They pulsed faintly, echoing the heartbeat of the vein itself. At the center of the room, a platform rose. Upon it lay a shape, not quite human, not quite stone. Ray approached slowly. The figure was curled like a sleeping child. Skin, if that's what it was, resembled petrified wood wrapped in quartz. Its arms were folded across its chest. Its head rested on mineral bedding that pulsed gently beneath it. Ellie's voice cracked. "It's not a body." Ray looked at her. "Then what? It's a core." Darius circled it cautiously. "A seed." June shook her head. "A heart." They stood in silence. Ray whispered, "Is it alive?" Ellie moved closer, hands trembling. She touched one of the spirals on the wall. It lit up, sending a soft pulse through the room. The figure stirred. Not fully, but its surface flexed, barely a twitch, like it registered contact. Ellie dropped her hand, breathing hard. Milo growled. From behind them, the air snapped. A sharp clatter. Footsteps. Voices. Hydrocore. Ray's stomach dropped. They followed us. June turned off her light. They tracked the signal from the last chamber. That broadcast. Ray stepped between Ellie and the entrance. "We hold them off, long enough for her to finish what she started." Darius pulled out the flare gun he'd packed. "Might not stop them, but it'll slow them." Heavy boots echoed down the stone corridor. Flashlights bounced along the walls. Then Mercer's voice, tight and angry. "End of the road," Callahan Ray shouted back. "You don't understand what this place is." Mercer laughed. "I don't care. Whatever it is, it doesn't belong to you." June hissed, "He's going to destroy it." Ellie turned to Ray, eyes filled with panic. "We can't let him touch it. If he disrupts the vein now, it won't just collapse, it'll echo." Ray looked around. The spirals on the wall, the pool, the heartbeat. Everything in this place was tension and memory wound tight like a spring. One disruption could set it off. Ray knelt beside the figure. His hand hovered over its chest, so close to its center, he felt the hum in his bones. And he whispered, "What do you want us to do?" No answer. Just a rising pulse, a tremor. Ellie stepped beside him and placed her palm next to his. And then the walls sang. A low, resonant note swept through the chamber, silencing even Mercer's approach. Lights flickered. The spirals all lit at once. Mercer reached the doorway just in time to see the heart of the vein pulse a blinding blue. He screamed something unintelligible. Ray grabbed Ellie and dove. Darius pulled June down behind the platform. A pressure wave burst from the center of the chamber, not destructive but cleansing. Everything froze. Then slowly, the figure on the platform began to rise, floating, rotating gently. Its eyes opened blue crystal orbs that reflected every spiral, every layer of memory embedded in this place. And it looked at Ellie. Not Ray, not Mercer. Ellie. A voice not spoken but felt entered her, and Ray knew. She wasn't just hearing the vein, she was part of it. The vein was no longer humming. It was singing. Ray barely registered that he was still kneeling, his hand against the glowing platform. His ears rang with vibrations that didn't travel through air but through blood. The chamber shimmered with radiant spirals, alive with movement memory, and something else will. In the center of it all floated Ellie. Her arms extended slightly, palms open, her eyes locked with the crystalline gaze of the figure that had risen from the mineral bed. Its face held no features, and yet it reflected Ellie's own expression, back at her calm, wide-eyed understanding. None of them dared move. Even Mercer stood frozen at the threshold flashlight, forgotten mouth slightly open, as he stared at the impossible. Then Ellie spoke. Except it wasn't speech, not in the way they knew it. Her voice came layered, echoed by the spiral walls, carried on currents of pressure and tone. It was as if she was speaking with the chamber through the vein itself. She doesn't just hear the vein, Ray whispered. She speaks for it now. June dropped to her knees beside him. She's not the messenger anymore. Darius said nothing. He gripped the flare gun with white knuckles but didn't raise it. What use was fire against something that pulsed with the memory of the earth? The floating figure before Ellie slowly descended. Its glow dimmed not from weakness, but like a lantern shielding its flame. The spiral veins in the walls quieted one by one, returning to a soft, steady rhythm. The vein was breathing again. Ellie lowered herself gently to the platform. Her feet touched the mineral with no sound. She turned to them, eyes still shining with the faint blue of the chamber, but it was Ellie. Completely. Mercer found his voice. What is this? What the hell is this? Ra stepped forward. This is the core of everything your company's been trying to mine, manipulate, and bury. It's not a resource, Ellie added, her voice calm. It's a memory structure. A consciousness. Buried after something broke the surface a long time ago. June asked gently. What did it bury? Ellie looked at her, then at the floating figure now silent beside her. Us. Ray blinked. What do you mean, us? Ellie stepped off the platform barefoot on the stone. This ridge, this whole mountain, it was once connected to something far bigger, something that ran across the world. A network of memory, sound, pulse, the Earth's own voice. But a long time ago, that voice fractured, and parts of it were hidden, buried. June's voice trembled. To protect it, Ellie nodded. And to protect us. The vein absorbs trauma, history. It doesn't just remember events, it contains them. And when you drill into it without understanding it, releases what it held back. Darius muttered, You mean hydrocore cracked the lid on a damn pressure cooker? Ellie looked at Ray. And it used me to warn you. Because I was close enough. Bloodline. Memory line. Ray staggered back a step. Your mother. Ellie nodded again. She felt the pull, too, but she was afraid. She buried it even deeper. She left it to Nana Eleanor, who tried to decode it. But the vein needed someone who wouldn't fear the pressure. Someone who could listen without drowning. Mercer stepped forward, voice sharp. And what now? You give it a voice, and then what? You expect the world to listen to a kid. The chamber trembled. Every spiral lit again, but this time in red. Ray raised a hand. Don't. Ellie didn't blink. You still think this is about you. That's why it's dying. Outside, the first real quake hit. A slow roll, not sharp like the ground was yawning awake. Ray knew that kind of quake. It wasn't tectonic. It was displacement. Movement beneath something ancient pushing up. Ellie's voice dropped into something almost melodic. The ridge has decided. The cycle ends now. Suddenly, the blue figure pulsed once more and began to collapse, its glowing minerals peeling inward, folding like petals returning to seed. The platform beneath it cracked, and a deep rumble rolled through the walls. Ray grabbed Ellie's arm. It's closing. The chamber, it's not going to stay open. She turned to him, tears in her eyes, but no fear. Then we go, all of us. June was already helping Darius toward the corridor. Milo barked, circling back toward the entrance as dust fell from the ceiling. But Mercer didn't move. You can't leave this. You can't just abandon this kind of power. Ray turned. It's not yours. It never was. The ground gave a hard jolt. Mercer lunged forward toward the platform, but Ellie stepped between him and the spiral palm raised. No. The air around her shimmered, and Mercer froze mid-step, caught in a field of invisible pressure like time had thickened around him. Ellie didn't touch him. She didn't have to. Leave him, she said. Ray didn't argue. They ran. Through the corridor, the humming spirals began to collapse behind them, sealing themselves in radiant coils of light and stone. The earth reclaiming its secrets. The memory returning to silence. They burst from the spiral entrance just as a final quake dropped part of the quarry wall behind them. Trees swayed unnaturally, snow falling in heavy sheets. But the air smelled cleaner. Not like smoke or ozone, but like water, freshly turned soil, something cleansed. They didn't stop running until they reached the forest's edge. Ray turned, breath fogging in the air. The quarry behind them was gone. No crater, no dust cloud, just a slope now smooth and silent, as if the earth had taken a breath and exhaled the truth back into itself. Ellie stood beside him, holding her notebook, its last page blank except for a single spiral drawn in blue. What happens now? June asked, panting. Ellie looked up at the sky. We listen. Ray wrapped an arm around her shoulder, pulling her close. And we protect it. Darius sat heavily on a log. And if it ever wakes again, Ellie met his gaze. Then it'll call for me. Or someone like me, because the vein doesn't forget, and it never speaks by accident. The wind rustled through the trees. Snow continued to fall, but for the first time in generations, Coldbone Ridge was quiet, and the silence didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like peace. For now. 6 weeks later, spring reached Coldbone Ridge. Snowmelt trickled down through mossy roots, slipping into channels carved by centuries of pressure and time. The land no longer pulsed with tension. It rested. Quiet. Not gone, never gone, but no longer screaming. Ray stood on the porch of Eleanor's cabin, his hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug of coffee. It was barely warm, but he held it anyway. Some part of him still needed to feel the weight. Down in the meadow, Ellie knelt in the grass beside Milo, tracing a new spiral into the dirt with a stick. The motion was gentle. Not like a signal, not like a call, just memory. Reverent. They hadn't told anyone where the spiral entrance had gone. Not even June. The quarry was now nothing more than a sloped rise covered in pine needles and wild violets, a place the wind passed through, but didn't linger in. And no one asked too many questions. Not after the tremors stopped, not after the emergency broadcast faded into silence, and not after Hydrocorps withdrew every piece of equipment from the ridge, denying they'd ever planned anything larger than topographical research. Mercer was never found, and no one searched too hard. June had stayed for a few days longer after the collapse, long enough to help Ray piece together a rough timeline of what had happened, long enough to draft a version of the truth that didn't set the world on fire. And then she left with a spiral tattooed on her inner wrist, just beneath the sleeve, and an envelope of photos labeled simply. When they're ready, Ray took a long breath, then stepped down off the porch. "You tracing again?" he asked, crouching beside Ellie. She nodded. "It helps me think." "What are you thinking about?" She glanced up at him. Her eyes were clearer now. Still wide, still holding too much for her age, but steady. "I think it's not finished." Ray's stomach tightened. "You mean the vein? No." She shook her head. "I mean us." She dropped the stick, let the breeze sweep across the spiral she'd drawn. "You said the vein remembers everything, right?" Ray nodded. "Yeah. Then it remembers people, too. Families. Pain. Hope." She looked toward the trees. "It knew we were broken. That's why it called." Ray said nothing. She wasn't wrong. The cabin had become home again, but not in the old way. It wasn't a retreat now, it was a watchtower. A resting point between something vast and something still healing. "Did you ever think," Ellie continued, "that it didn't want saving, that it wanted to save us?" Ray blinked, startled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone, blue, translucent, the size of a marble. One of the mineral fragments from the platform given to her by the vein itself before it collapsed. She held it out to him. "I think this is a reminder that we carry it now." Ray took it in his palm, and the faintest hum tickled his bones. "It's quiet," he said. Ellie smiled softly. "It trusts us." Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and rust, Ray lit a fire in the stone pit behind the cabin. Darius arrived just before sunset, leaning heavily on a new cane, but looking healthier than he had in years. They sat in a circle, Ray, Ellie, Darius, and June, who'd returned for one last story before heading west. Milo curled by the fire, twitching in a half-dream. So June said, passing Ray a notepad, "What's next?" Ray stared into the flames. "We watch. We listen. And if it ever calls again, we answer." Darius raised his mug. "To the girl who speaks in spirals." Ellie blushed, but she didn't deny it. The fire crackled. Night settled in. Above them, the stars slowly revealed themselves, faint at first, then bolder, each one a memory burning steady in the dark. Ray leaned back in his chair, listening not just with ears, but with the quiet part of him that had once been broken. The part that had believed he had nothing left to give, no way to protect the child he loved. That part didn't feel hollow anymore. He looked at Ellie. She was sketching again. And for the first time in his life, Ray knew what legacy felt like. Not money, not land, not power, but story. A truth that refused to stay buried. Later, when the fire had burned down and the stars hung low, Ellie pressed her sketchbook into his lap. I drew it for you, she said. Ray opened it. On the page was a spiral, but not a perfect one, not cold mathematical. It was uneven, alive. Woven through it were symbols, images of the cabin, of Eleanor's face, of Milo's paw print, of Darius's old mining helmet, of June's sat phone. And at the very center, a small drawing of a father and daughter, arms around each other, smiling. He swallowed hard. This is beautiful, he whispered. It's not finished, Ellie said, echoing her words from the meadow. Ray nodded. Good. They sat together, notebook open between them, the wind whispering through pine needles like a voice too old to name. Down in the earth, the vein slept. Not forgotten, but no longer alone, because it had passed its memory into human hands, and in doing so reminded them of something they'd forgotten in all their noise and hunger and fear, that the earth remembers, that it listens, that it feels. And when we finally learn to do the same, really listen, really feel, we might just remember who we are too.